Explore the fascinating world of optical illusions, pareidolia, and UFO sightings in this intriguing video. Discover how our brains make us see things that aren't there, like Jesus in toast, and learn about the U.S. Air Force's Project Blue Book, which investigated UFOs in the 1950s. Dive into the CIA's involvement in shaping public perceptions of UFOs and how it influenced the project's findings. Uncover the legacy of Project Blue Book and its impact on the UFO debate. Don't miss this thought-provoking discussion that will leave you questioning what you see and believe. But before we get into it, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And if you want to get notified every time I upload a new video, click the bell icon as well. It really helps me out, and I appreciate it a lot. All right, let's get started. You know how some people claim to see Jesus in their toast? Yeah, our brains play tricks on us. Sometimes we think we see something, like a weird thing on the horizon, and it turns out to be an optical illusion called fata morgana. Or maybe you spot something odd in the sky, only to realize it's just a bird swooping down to nab your sandwich. That's our mind's way of finding patterns in things, even when they aren't really there. This is called pareidolia, and it helped our ancestors spot dangerous animals back in the day. There's also this thing called apophenia, where we wrongly connect different pieces of information. So, what's the deal with all those UFO sightings people have been talking about forever? The U.S. Air Force actually took it seriously and started an investigation back in the late 1940s. They called it Project Blue Book, which had its high point in the 50s. The Executive Services Directorate reported in 1966 that the Air Force took the lead on this project, which was actually set up by the Department of Defense. Now, you might be thinking, this was all about looking for aliens, but nope. The big question was, do these UFOs, or UAPs as they're now called, pose a threat to U.S. security? At the end of the day, the Air Force concluded that these UFOs weren't really a big deal. But here's the kicker. The CIA was also involved in guiding the direction of the investigation. So can we really trust these conclusions? The CIA's presence does make things a bit murky, doesn't it? In short, our brains are wired to make sense of random stuff, and sometimes that means we think we're seeing things that aren't actually there. And when it comes to UFOs, even the U.S. Air Force isn't totally sure what's up, especially when you consider the CIA had a hand in the pot. It makes you wonder, right? But hey, that's what makes these discussions so intriguing. Let's get one thing straight. Project Blue Book didn't find any aliens or supernatural stuff. What it did find, according to a 1966 report by the Executive Services Directorate, were things like hoaxes, hallucinations, and regular things flying around, like birds, flares, and clouds. But here's where it gets a bit interesting. Between 1953 and 1965, the project did note 253 UFOs, and in 1965 alone, 17 objects were still on the list for further checks. Now, when we say UFO, we're just talking about things flying around that we can't quite figure out. Sorry to burst your bubble if you were hoping for little green men or fancy spaceships. Now, let's rewind a bit. The start of Project Blue Book was pretty much at the same time as the most talked about UFO event ever, the 1947 Roswell incident. You know the story, right? Pilot Kenneth Arnold was flying near Washington State's Cascade Mountains when he spotted some weird, fast-moving shapes in the sky. They moved like a saucer skipping over water, he said. Not long after, a guy named Mac Brazel found some odd metallic bits and pieces on his land. The U.S. military first said it was a flying saucer, but then backtracked real fast and said, "Nah, it's just a weather balloon." But here's a kicker. Later in 1947, Air Force Lieutenant General Nathan Twining said those flying discs were real and not visionary or fictitious. He felt the government should take this stuff seriously. And boom, that's when Project Blue Book got started. So yeah, while Project Blue Book may not have given us any proof of extraterrestrial life, it sure left us with some things to think about. The project found a lot of easily explainable stuff, but it also left a few questions unanswered. Add in the fact that it started around the same time as the Roswell incident, and you've got yourself a recipe for some serious head-scratching. So, before it got the cool name Project Blue Book, this UFO study was called Project Sign and then Project Grudge. Talk about an identity crisis, right? According to a 1966 report by the Executive Services Directorate, the project had two main questions to answer. 1. Are UFOs a danger to the US? And 2. Can we learn any cool tech stuff from them? Okay, I'm putting it in simpler terms, but that's the gist. In the beginning, the team working on this was kind of thinking that if these flying things weren't Russian, they might be, from another planet, like Mars or something. But General Hoyt Vandenberg, the Air Force's big boss at the time, wasn't having any of that. He thought that was pure nonsense. So, he steered the project back on track, making them focus on more everyday explanations like pranks, light flares, and good old birds. Fast forward to 1952, and Major General John Stamford, the Air Force's Director of Intelligence, threw another curveball. He said, and this is from the New York Times, mind you, that it's not entirely impossible that we're looking at ships from another planet. He even talked about it in a Pentagon briefing you can find on YouTube. But here's the catch. These weird sightings didn't seem to pose any direct threat to the US. They also weren't part of some top-secret government scheme. Stamford mentioned some reports were made by credible people seeing incredible things, but there was no clear pattern that screamed danger. So there you have it. The project went through a few name changes, had a bit of an identity crisis, and even pondered the possibility of alien tech. But at the end of the day, it came down to more ordinary stuff. Still, it's fun to think about what could have been, right? Ah, the 1950s. A decade chock full of UFO sightings. Now, this is where the CIA steps into the scene with Project Blue Book. And let me tell you, things get a little messy. Some folks think that the CIA's involvement means we can't fully trust what the project had to say. Heck, some even argue that the whole thing was a sneaky way to spread false info about UFOs. So, what did the CIA actually do? In 1953, they drafted this whole plan about how to talk to the public about UFOs. Their goal? To make sure people didn't freak out. They wanted to use TV, movies, and articles to teach people how to think critically about UFO stories. And guess what? They also wanted to keep an eye on groups that were super into UFOs. Why? Because these groups could really sway public opinion if a ton of sightings suddenly happened. If you're curious, there's an article in the CIA's own journal that dives into all this stuff, and it says they sort of back it away from the project in the 60s. But here's the kicker. Not everyone was happy with how the CIA guided Project Blue Book. Take J. Allen Hynek, this astronomer dude, for instance. He's pretty vocal about how the project messed up. According to him, they fiddled with the data and were way too quick to say UFOs were just normal stuff in the sky. He even wrote that Project Blue Book was a complete mess because it didn't give UFOs the serious look they deserved. So, was the CIA's role a help or a hindrance? Depends on who you ask, but one thing's for sure. Their involvement made the project's conclusions a lot more, let's say, controversial. So, did Project Blue Book just turn into some sort of CIA tool to spread false info? Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? If it wasn't for the shadowy hands of US intelligence agencies poking around, maybe we'd trust the project's findings a bit more. You remember that Roswell crash story, right? First they said it was a flying saucer, but then they changed their tune and called it a weather balloon. The FBI report from that time even hinted that the weather balloon story didn't hold much water. Nowadays, anyone with internet can check out official stuff about Project Blue Book. The US Air Force has a brief rundown on their website basically saying, "We looked into it and found zilch." They also add that they're not likely to spend money on this kind of thing again, what with defense budgets going down and all. The project's papers have been moved to the National Archives, and guess what? Their take also supports the "nothing to see here" vibe. But let's not kid ourselves. People who believe in UFOs are going to have issues with these official findings, just like skeptics will be nodding their heads saying, "Told you so." But just because people disagree doesn't mean we're talking about the second coming of Jesus through a piece of toast. What we have here is a classic case of he said, she said, but the official story is there's nothing out of the ordinary in the skies. So, do we take that as the gospel truth or keep asking questions? The plot thickens, doesn't it? If you like what I do in here, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, if you have some anime that you'd like me to cover, write it down in the comment section. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.